Hey guys, my name is Shroomy. I have a lot of different names and I just really like lore. I wanted to go back and start discussing some of the older factions in the Overwatch world. Mainly factions that connect to heroes, but also dissecting what exactly makes these factions tick. Of course, this is going to be a little return to the faction series that I had about 5 or 6 months ago. I thought a really fun faction that I've wanted to talk about since I see no information discussed on them online is the Deep Sea Raiders, and of course, Mauga. Mauga's a character I've wanted to do a dissection on in particular for a little while, so we're just going to be doing all that in this video. The Deep Sea Raiders are responsible for a lot of background lore in the Overwatch universe, and they have some really interesting ties to certain characters you probably wouldn't expect. So there is a little bit of juicy information here. Of course, before we go too deep, don't forget to like and subscribe. We make content on Overwatch lore about every week, so if you're interested, don't forget to stick around. Anyways, let's get into talking about the Deep Sea Raiders, and their odd origins in the Overwatch world. So, before we can truly get into why the Deep Sea Raiders exist and why they're a faction, we need to go a little bit farther than even their origin, and explain a smaller topic first: Super Coral. Now, saying Super Coral aloud and on its own, you might be wondering why does this affect anything with the Raiders, but these two concepts are pretty intertwined. So, Super Coral in the Overwatch world was created to protect the remaining coral reefs in the oceans. This was one of many ways that humanity tried to preserve nature. Think of like Anubis, the god AI, where Anubis was created to preserve the environment. This was just another one of those ways that they tried to go about it. So, the effect of Super Coral was to protect coral reefs, but the effect on oceans was much larger than they even thought it would be. Instead of protecting what was left, the coral reefs expanded, regrowing these reefs everywhere in Polynesia. Not only did it regrow them, but it also fixed up the oceans, removing a lot of garbage and just generally cleaning them. This was a massive win for the environment overall, and something a lot of the world governments had no idea would even happen. As the reefs grew in size and continue to grow even to this day in Overwatch's world, organizations across the globe claim this has halted business and had negative effects on them, making some trade routes impossible to navigate. Wanting to protect their homes and oceans, something that was sacred to them, a group formed around the islands of Polynesia, the Deep Sea Raiders. This group was brought together after the Omnic Crisis, and its goal was simple. After the crisis, fossil fuels and human industries threatened to pollute and harm their waters, and the people had had enough. This group of eco-terrorists, as Overwatch Declassified calls them, would raid any ships in their waters, looting all they wanted and could, and leaving the rest for the super coral below to consume and grow, making it a win-win for both sides. The Raiders as an organization are pretty vast. They exist in small branches across all of the Polynesian oceans. One such leader was, of course, Mauga's father. He led the Samoan group of the Raiders. Mauga would often journey with the Raiders on missions and raids during this time as well. Now, not a lot is known on Mauga's father aside from this, but we do have a little image of him from Overwatch's Christmas comic that came out a couple years ago, but we'll be getting into him more in a little bit. The other leaders and figures in this organization aren't currently known, but we can assume each branch has a leader, kind of like what Malosi is for Samoa, so every island here probably at least has one head. I would assume they kind of work like a kind of splintered faction, almost like Null Sector in a sense, where they have different leaders and they kind of talk back and forth, but they mostly do their own thing. But that's purely speculation on my part. The Polynesian League, the local government and power of these islands, has tried to deal with the Raiders over time, but it became more and more clear as everything went on in these early days that these Raiders were way too much for them to handle. There was just too many and they all did different things, so the government was left without anything really to do. This was around the time Overwatch's golden era was, so Overwatch began to get involved. They were dispatched multiple times to deal with the Raiders in the past, but the most important is brought up in Freya's comic Storm Chaser. During this event, the search and rescue team was dispatched to save a group of civilians being used as ransom by the Raiders. The job was simple. The strike team would distract the Raiders, meanwhile, search and rescue would save those being held captive and escape the city. Yet, plans changed when Gabriel Reyes commanded his team to bring the fighting into the city, where the captives were being held. This resulted in a few casualties. 14 civilians did not make it out of this. This was one of the many reasons why Emery, for an example, would eventually leave the strike team and Overwatch as a whole. But this also was a big moment for when Overwatch was kind of viewed as no longer being the heroes they once were. These deaths were pretty not common at the time, but a lot of these issues and casualties with missions began to sprung up, and was bringing up a lot of questions about what exactly Overwatch's purpose was in the new world. When a person like Emery left as well, who pretty much was one of the only people who worked with search and rescue, at least from the strike team, it kind of was a nail in the coffin, or one of many nails in the coffin, for the fall of Overwatch. But that's a different story for a different time. After all these kind of mini skirmishes, the raiders continued on, and slowly the Polynesian seas became even more rough. When Overwatch was eventually forced to withdraw from their war with the raiders, and Overwatch eventually shut down, the Polynesian governments of these areas eventually threw in the towel, and these raiders just got to expand and grow until they became something far bigger than anyone could really control. Now, the raiders completely control these waters, with little to no government interference. The governments try and stop them as best they can, but without Overwatch, it's pretty much in vain. We know that the Raiders still exist in some form in today's lore and timeline, but we don't really know the scope of the faction in the recent years. The only character we really have to represent them is Mauga, and he doesn't really talk about them much. In fact, we don't really get a lot of information on his father either. But we do get a little bit more on them from Mauga's backstory that's in the website, but also in-game. So I'll go over a little bit of what we learned from that, and everything with Mauga now in general. Early on, Mauga would pretty much only live with the Raiders. His father, of course, was the leader of the Samoan branch, so he would go out with them a lot, and these days early on would shape a lot of Mauga's view on the world. He would learn a lot of these almost intellectual things from the Raiders. This was an eco-terrorist group, or at the very least, a rebellion group in some ways, so there was a lot going on here that shaped how Mauga saw everything. As Mauga grew, he became more and more renowned in the Raiders, until, one day, there was a fatal accident. Mauga became wounded, barely surviving thanks to a risky surgery performed by a deep-sea raider medic. The medic was forced to transplant a second heart into Mauga, creating a thrill-seeking and live-in-the-moment man we all know and love today. So, this is pretty much all the information that we have on the Deep Sea Raiders. Mauga's relationship with them is something that we've gotten, like I said there, a couple times in the past, but it's not something that's really discussed too heavily. After all of this with Mauga, he eventually would leave the Deep Sea Raiders, or at least step away from them, to go join Talon. Seeing Talon is a bit more of a fun time, and also something that would, of course, give him a way out of the Deep Sea Raiders to branch out on his own. We don't know the full extent of why he would specifically go to Talon here, but I did think it was something I wanted to bring up. Now, in Mauga's time in Talon, we do know that the Deep Sea Raiders are still around, but I don't believe Vendetta's working with them, and even if she was, these guys are pretty much a wild card, like the Junkers, so I doubt that Vendetta really even cares to work with them in general. They're on their own and do their own thing in their corner of the world. They don't really want any expansion, and they just want to protect the super coral and, of course, the coral reefs below. So, unless Vendetta is specifically going to do something with super coral, which I highly doubt, that's probably the max we're going to be seeing of them for a little while. Of course, I would love to see Mauga's father a bit more. Like I said, we only have one image of him from the Christmas comic a couple years back, so Mauga's relationship with his father seems to be a really good thing. I mean, they're joking and having a great time together. So, I'm assuming Mauga's relationship with the Deep Sea Raiders in general is still really good, and his dad's probably proud of him wherever he is now. But the Deep Sea Raiders as a faction are nothing too crazy, but I did want to focus and bring up some information with them that we have here. Now, I don't think they're going to be touching on anything with them for a little while now. In fact, I don't even know if we really need another hero to represent them. I think Mauga does a perfect job at what he is. So, overall, that's pretty much all we have on the Deep Sea Raiders, and Mauga as well. The Deep Sea Raiders really do feel like a little self-contained story, but I do think that if we ever go over to everything going on in the Polynesian Islands and focus on that for a little bit, maybe with a Mauga's story or even a Mauga's season, maybe we could see them getting involved with one of the factions. It would be really fun to see Overwatch have to fight them again, just as have a parallel to what they did in the past and have a new story there. Maybe we get to see Sojourn's perspective on how everything went down back in the day, or maybe we get to see how Emery feels if he's still with Talon at that time. But yeah, this is pretty much all we know about them. I just want to make a video summarizing them and talking about them. What do you think of the Deep Sea Raiders and Mauga's connection to them? Do you want to see more of them in the future? And of course, what do you guys want to see next? Let me know down below, as I'm going to be looking at those comments to make general lore videos on to recap people on those smaller factions. Anyways, that's all from me. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll talk to you in the next one. Bye!